Hey everybody, it's Rudy Basso, the co-owner of Don't Split the Podcast Network. I would like to encourage you, lovely listener, to head on over to our website and give a listen to my show that I host with my brother called Game O'Clock. It is a video game retrospective, introspective, other spectives, all about the kind of games that we love. And to be honest, we love just about every game out there. Game O'Clock released every Thursday. It's fun, it's short, and hey, you'll probably learn something about video games.
This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. This week on the show, I'm talking with the amazing Andrew Kane, Brittany Quintero, and Enrique Bertran, aka the Newbie DM. And what are we talking about? We are talking about what it's like to be a new DM. Brittany and Andrew are longtime players, new dungeon masters, and the Newbie DM has been writing about being a Newbie DM for quite a while now. So let's jump into our interview with them. They've got lots of great tips and tricks for those of you who are just starting out there. All right, everybody, now I am here with some amazing dungeon masters. Very happy to have them here talking about what it's like to be a new Dungeons & Dragons dungeon master. And so we have with us, first, the Newbie DM himself, Enrique Bertran, is here. Enrique, why don't you tell the people out there who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Who am I and what do I do? All right, so my name's Enrique. I play D&D. I have an addiction.
Don't we all?
So a few years ago when 4E hit the scene, I started a blog about DMing because I was a new DM. And I figured if I'm going to be learning how to do this, I might as well share what I'm learning along the way. And hopefully someone will get something out of it. And my blog was born. And then I joined Twitter. And then I started podcasting about it, and then I sort of joined the D&D community, and what is it? It's 9 years later, here we are. So still going strong and still enjoying listening to podcasts such as yours and everybody else's. So I'm no longer podcasting now. I just like being a guest. I really dislike editing.
Yeah,
so.
It's a lot easier when
it's a lot easier when you come on and you walk away after it's done. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you back. It is great to have you here. I remember reading your blog when 4th edition was underway and everything, and loving it. So it's actually a dream come true to have you on this podcast and talk to you.
Come on, James. Stop that. I toy dragon to breathe fire on you. Thank you.
And also with us, Brittany Quintero. Welcome back to Tabletop Babble. In case people haven't listened to the wonderful podcast you did with the rest of the Venture Maidens about cooperative storytelling, tell the people who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games.
Hello, I have been a D&D addict for 3 years now. Just kidding. I play a character in our podcast, Venture Maidens, called Arnadel Ithil, an elven warlock, whose storyline kind of encompasses a very awkward romance, among other things, thus far in our podcast. It is our first podcast that we've ever made, and this is the first year that I have tried my hand at being a dungeon master. Mm-hmm. And outside of that, I just really enjoy playing Dungeons & Dragons and video games.
That's awesome. Well, welcome back. It is great to have you here. A final guest who people might remember from the roundtable first time here on Tabletop Babble, the one and only Andrew Kane. Who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
I'm Andrew, and I have been playing Dungeons & Dragons since high school. A buddy of mine, James Introcaso, said, "Hey, do you want to play D&D?" And I said, "I'm sure I don't." And the rest is history. So I've been playing for a while now. As a player, I took a little break from it, but then the internet made things easy to get back into things with people that I like. And so it's been a lot of fun playing my way through 4th edition and now 5th edition. And recently been trying my hand as a DM for the first time. But I learned from the best, since James has primarily been the only person who ever really DM'd me up until this point. And I'm just a little bit starstruck right now to be with the newbie DM and one of the Venture Maidens.
Aw, likewise. It's very intimidating.
Big fan of the DM's Deep Dive with Mike Shea with Enrique, and I am a regular listener of the Venture Maidens. So I am, I feel like I'm the odd man out here with all these titans.
No way.
And that's why it's great to have all of you on here because, of course, our topic is new DMs today. Brittany and Andrew, you said this is sort of, you've been longtime players, but first-time DMs really just this year. So I'd love to talk to you all about what it's like to be a new DM. What are some of the challenges we face? What is the expectation versus the reality, right? After being a player for so long, what's it like? And we have Enrique, who is sort of the expert on newbie DMs. He is the newbie DM. 8 years running. Or 9 years, right? 9 years running. So Enrique, why don't we start with you then? You played for a long time, right? Before you jumped into tabletop role-playing games. Or before you jumped into running games, I should say. What was your sort of expectation about running a game, and how was the reality different from that?
I think but the first thing I should point out is that when I started running, I was playing with my friends. Mm-hmm. And these are people that I've been playing with for over 20 years, and these are people that I was completely comfortable around, and I had no issues, being me around these people, right? It's not like I sat at a store somewhere and tried running for the first time. I mean, these are people that were my friends and I was comfortable with. And even then, I remember the first time I tried running 4E, I sat there, I had all my stuff ready to go, the maps and the minis and all that good stuff for keeping the Shadowfell. And I sat there and I was kind of like frozen, like, okay, now what? Now I got to start. Now I got to entertain these people for 4 hours. Oh God! Right. And reading the box, and then I remember I fumbled my way through the first fight. And mind you, I knew D&D. Like I knew the language of D&D. I had been playing D&D for a long time. But once you're sitting on the other end of the table, it's so different because all eyes are on you, and they're looking at you as the expert, and they're looking at you as the guy that's, or the gal who's making the rules, and not making the rules, but interpreting the rules and making sure that everything's flowing as it should. And it's daunting. Mm-hmm. It's not that comfortable, even if you're playing with people that are your friends, because one slip up and someone's going to call you on it. There's always that guy who's the rules lawyer who's going to be like, hey, yo, hold up. That's not right. You messed up, or hey, oh, hold up, you skipped me, or hold up. And there's the other guy that you look down at the table and someone's playing on their phone because they're bored. Mm-hmm. So obviously, oh my God, I'm boring these people. What am I doing? Why am I DMing? These people would rather be on their phone playing, I don't know, dots or whatever it is that they're playing. What am I doing? So it was daunting. Mm-hmm. But again, I guess I had the comfort level I was at a point where, these people were my friends, so I didn't really feel uncomfortable, but I did feel a sense of anxiousness about it.
Sure.
That sort of went away with time. Mm-hmm. At the end of the night, we talked about the game a little bit. We talked about what we liked about it, the system, the fight, the whatever. And you kind of eased into it. Mm-hmm. And over time, I got more comfortable with it. And, I made one mistake that I always tell when people ask me, and I mentioned this in the DM's Deep Dive with Mike Shea that Andrew was talking about. The biggest mistake I think a new DM can make is trying to be Tolkien. You are not Tolkien, and you're not going to entertain people like Tolkien entertain people. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about your big world and all the stuff you have planned and the council of such and such who lives up in the mountaintop of such and such. No one cares. Concentrate on your little adventure, making sure that your first level characters are the heroes of their town or whatever it is that what they're doing. And that's all you got to worry about. Save the world building for later. Work on that with your players. Involve them in it. Don't try to do all that stuff at once because you're just going to crash and burn.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And especially, you talked about this, right? Being a multitasker is like a big part of a DM of like you're managing all of these things. And I think if you can get out of your head a little bit and sort of be in just that moment, that adventure with those players, it really does go a long way.
Sometimes DMs tend to forget that there's 5 other people sitting at the table who are probably just as creative as you. Mm-hmm. You got to tap into that. Mm-hmm. You got to tap into that creativity. Otherwise, you're just leaving it on the table for no reason.
Yeah.
You don't have to have that whole that burden shouldn't just fall on you.
Mm-hmm.
You want to build a world that's great, but involve your players in it. They're going to be playing in it. They're going to live in that world. So why not let them take part in it?
Yeah, that's definitely true, and that's sort of what we talked about last week, right, Brittany? With collaborative storytelling, having a lot of creative people tapping into that, I think is a good thing to do as a DM. But what about you, Brittany? Sort of the expectation versus the reality of dungeon mastering. It's probably pretty fresh for you, considering you've just started running.
Oh man, there's so much to say. I had one game that I started when I first moved to San Diego to meet people. So I was like, oh, this will be a really good way for me to make new friends. So I will put together a game and everybody's down to play, but nobody wanted to DM. So I stepped up to the plate. I had no idea what I was doing. I had only played with Celeste. I had bought the Monster Manual, PHB, and the DMG, and made a story with a lot of loopholes that fell right apart after a couple of games with complete strangers that I had never met. So it was very daunting indeed, but it did end up being an awesome opportunity for me to it fizzled out. They weren't really interested in continuing to play. So I was able to take what I learned from that, and I actually put together another group of people whom I have the luxury of subjecting my clients to talking about D&D. I'm a tattoo artist, so they can't go anywhere while I'm working on them. So I had a client that I very quickly became friends with, and he was really interested in playing D&D. So he got his friends and his brother into the group that I'm currently running. And we've gone 6 months strong. And the things that I have learned are having your players, they're able to essentially write a portion of the story themselves. So they're doing some work with you. I actually don't prepare that much for each game. I kind of have a very, very vague and general goal that I want everyone to accomplish. And then I'll kind of put them in a direction for what village or town, or maybe come up with something unique. And so far that's been working really well. It's allowed whatever loopholes that I'm like, we'll get to a point. I'm just like, oh man, I forgot a really important part that person you needed to interact with, so it's kind of that vagueness has let me kind of steer it around to where I need them to go. And it also keeps things from getting railroaded is what I'm kind of finding with being new and what I'm learning. But I think the biggest thing is actually listening to other DMs. Playing with more games and experiencing new styles of DMing has actually been the biggest help, I think, with how to run my games and finding unique ways to be inspired or different ways to do things or write things and make things happen. So that's kind of been what I've experienced so far.
That's really good. That's a lot of really great advice wrapped up in there. Each one could probably be its own podcast, which is great. So I'll listen back to this when I get stumped for episode ideas.
I kind of lost track with what I was saying halfway through. I was like, oh, and yeah, this too. Sorry.
Andrew, what about you? What about your expectation versus reality? I'm really curious to hear this because I, like you mentioned, was your DM for a long time, but now I am also playing in the game you are running.
That's correct. So it's interesting. Well, first of all, you made it look so easy, James, that I was like, oh, I have no qualms about taking on this role. And now I'm doing it. And I'm like, oh, this is a little more work than maybe I mentally anticipated, but that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think one of the things that helped me to help me jump into this is because I loved playing. I loved being a player. But taking on this side of the role was, I thought I had a really good idea for a story hook, right, to set up this whole campaign that I had talked to you about, and that's what led to everything. I think when I was beginning to prepare, I thought things would come a little more easily to me. I like talking, I like telling stories, all these things. So I was like, oh, this will be easy. And then it was sometimes as I was preparing things or just laying out the structure of what I wanted to do, I realized things weren't quite as easy as I thought they would be. But then I reminded myself that most stories have already been told in some form or another. And so it's really totally fine to take an idea or a story you like and reappropriate into the world. And so as someone who was a classics major in college and has studied a lot of different mythologies, among other things, as well as being a big old comic book nerd, I've been able to kind of find little story threads and things that have helped inspire me in my own storytelling, but might feel familiar to some people, which I actually like, because I think that helps with the players when they kind of recognize what might have inspired something or things like that. And so I appreciate that. In fact, just in our last session, there was literally a character whose very name was the same as a real historical figure, among other things. And one of the players immediately recognized what I was doing, and that was totally fine because I was okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it also helps, with the shorthand sometimes, I think, when that happens, because it's like, okay, I know what role this person plays in this story now. As long as it's not like, oh, that person is, that person has a sled named Roseblood, right? It's not giving away any surprises. Spoiler alert for Citizen Kane, by the way.
There's a lot of truth in what Andrew's saying. There's no shame in stealing.
Yes.
And stealing liberally.
Absolutely.
For your story. There's no shame in that game. And it reminds me of a story real quick. I was playing one time with my brother DMing, and he's running us through this adventure, and we're fighting all these different enemies that keep coming. They're like mini bosses, right? And we stop and we're like, wait a minute. We're fighting the X-Men. Like, dude, you're throwing the X-Men at us. That was Nightcrawler, we just fought. That was Nightcrawler. He's popping in and out. I'm like, dude. And the other guy, wait a minute, the other guy was Wolverine. He's like, yeah, you got me. You're fighting the X-Men. So there is no shame in that game. Steal liberally and as often as you can, because, as you said, all those great stories have been told, so why not borrow from them?
One thing that I like to do is I'll steal a character, and then I will change that character's gender, and that usually will make it so people don't realize, like, oh, it's Wolverine, but a lady.
Reskinning, as Mike Shea and I love the concept of reskinning. Mm-hmm. Take an existing concept and just call it something else, and nobody will ever know.
Yeah, I totally agree with that idea of stealing, and I think, Brittany, your advice too about preparing light is great advice for first-time DMs. Going in with the idea of, hey, I have these moments for people to shine, and I have a loose outline of sort of what's going. Maybe what could happen in my head is a good way to approach it, because then when your players inevitably don't go to the dungeon that you've filled out 1,700 rooms in, and they avoid your mega dungeon completely, you won't be super mad about the 5 hours you wasted putting together a mega dungeon. And the other thing I would say is save those things. If you do fill out a dungeon and your players don't go into it this session, save it for the session when you don't think they're going to go into a dungeon, and then they do, you'll have that ready to roll. So always save your work, steal your work, and do as little work as possible.
I've definitely forced them into dungeons that they were like trying to avoid. And I'm like, oh no, you accidentally trip over a route that happens to be a port key that transports you where I want you to be.
It's a good way to do it. That's how Tomb of Horrors back in the day just started. Like, you're here at the dungeon. Good luck. What do you think are some common goofs that DMs make first time? Enrique, you said, I think that advice about world building, you don't need to come to this first session with your entire world fleshed out because you're the only one who cares about it, is a really, really good piece of advice. Especially if you're trying it for the first time and maybe you're only going to play 1 or 2 sessions with people. No reason to put what's over the mountains if they never go over the mountains, right?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that half the stuff you come up with when you're world building at that scale, it's never going to touch first level characters. Mm-hmm. First level characters should be worried about, the raids in the camp, or the goblin, the merchants getting. Yeah. BS, you're not worried about the epic world-changing events. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's fun to come up with, and it's fun to write it out, and it's fun to have it all ready to go. But you don't need any of that stuff. Like, really worry about the bandits on the King's Road, mm-hmm. attacking the merchant caravans. That's what you should be worried about. Not not the fight, not the gods fighting each other, that sort of.
And at the same time, I would say, right, along those lines and along the lines of stealing, there's a reason cliches exist. So, if you want to have your story start out in a tavern and you're like, oh, but every story does, for your first time, that's totally fine. Start out in a tavern, and then once the story gets rolling, you and your players together will find a way to make it unique. Right?
But make it your tavern. What is it about that tavern? So is it a tavern where all the taps magically all the glasses self-fill, and suddenly everybody has a full thing of beer in the counter? Is it a tavern? Is it an ever
that they would never go on an adventure?
Is it a chimney? Is it a chimney that's always lit, no matter what? Is it magical plates of food that appear? Whatever. Yeah, it's a tavern, but it's your tavern. It's a cool tavern, and it's a tavern that'll be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
When you guys go back and think about your first session that happened to take place in a tavern. But it wasn't just any tavern. It was a great tavern.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm stealing that.
Self-playing instrument. There's a whole band here, but no one's playing this instrument.
Those are great ideas, which I'm going to steal like all of. So thank you. What about you, Brittany? Like, are there any sort of common mistakes that you make or you see other people making that maybe you've cured yourself of now at this point, or there's stuff you're still doing that you're like, I wish I didn't do that?
Yeah, two very specific ones come to mind. The first one is I've gotten a lot better at this, but when you give them an inch, they take a mile. Initially, I was very over giving or over generous with the wondrous items or deity interactions and cool things that I gave or allowed my PCs to get or have.
Sure. They're
like
fun
I
to get
blessed
out,
them
yeah.
with. They really are, and they started asking for really specific things, and then it just kind of got out of hand. And I'm like, all right, nothing more. You guys are not going to encounter anything for a minute. So that was the first thing that I kind of was like, okay, no more cool stuff. And they all want specific background story stuff, which is totally fun and amazing, and I love doing that. But the requests were quite regular. So I was like, okay, you guys just hold on, I got stuff for you. Just don't worry and let it be. And then the other thing, it's gotten a lot easier, especially after I had a couple games in particular that we played that I think we got into the groove. Initially, I was really bad at railroading my players. And I think I hear and feel like that's a pretty common thing for new DMs and seasoned DMs alike. It comes from that concept of I spent so much time preparing this and it's so cool, you better like it.
Right.
Or you gotta do this thing. And I mentioned it earlier, bringing them to that dungeon that I spent so long preparing for. So I've gotten a lot better at just kind of going with the flow, and it's actually yielded the best games that we've had. And one in particular, instead of a magical tavern, my players ended up in a pickle shop, a very high-end pickle shop. And now we've all got this magic pickles, and there's an inside joke with the whole group about pickles. That ended up being great. They just kind of went with that on the fly, and they wanted to explore the town, and that's what they got.
That's awesome. And it's the kind of thing, those are the kinds of things you would only ever come up with if you sort of let go of your railroading instincts and let that story play out. And I guarantee your players forever will talk about the magic pickle shop, right?
What do you do with a magic pickle?
Well, there were jars, and this was a moment of properly making stuff up on the fly, and I think I had just the right amount of beer in my system for it to just flow smoothly. There was no hang-ups, not second guessing, making up character voices for this. And we determined that these really, really, really fancy, they were habanero spiced dill pickles, they were health potions, essentially. I put some health potion stats for it, and they spent some gold on it. And then I was, some players went on a trip to Seattle, and they found a pickle shop, and it was called Britt's Pickle Shop. So they sent me pictures of this pickle shop that they found in real life. And so it was just very marvelous. And so, yeah, that will definitely be a very memorable experience.
Well, there you go. Wow. That is awesome. Andrew, what about you? What do you think are maybe some common GM mistakes or some goofs maybe that you've made that you've were like, okay, and you've corrected or want to figure out how to correct?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes along with what's already been said about the world building too fast as well as railroading a little bit. And this happened to me in my first session that I ever DM'd, which is just as you're creating a story, it's a collaborative story, as we've talked about. And so don't assume that your players, who all are playing characters that have personalities, etc., are just going to do what you want them to do because you kind of have now decided it's going in that direction. And so as I was setting up this story to kind of progress in the direction I wanted it to, one of the characters, it also helps, I should note, that I'm playing with a group that I've been playing with for a while, so we're all very comfortable with each other, but he challenged me through his character and my NPC as to why we were doing that, and I had not prepared to have to respond to that. Mm-hmm. And it was fine. Everything worked out, and I had no issue with it because his character, the way he's playing it, what he was doing made perfect sense. So I give him props for doing it, but it reminded me that just because I'm kind of oh, now there's this tower that you guys need to enter, people aren't always just going to automatically do it. We worked through it because the group worked through it, but it was a good reminder that at times, when it comes to that, you have to be flexible. You also have to be ready to maybe have a deeper conversation in character than you had originally planned for, which is totally fine. And, I always want to give credit to players when they're playing their characters, how they've kind of designed them to, as well as making the story work within that context.
Yeah, that's great piece of advice. And the amount of, and I don't know about you, Enrique, but you probably have experienced this too, the amount of NPCs who I thought would be this will be a person who will just show up and say a thing and then they'll go away, who then get involved in a 40-minute conversation with the player characters. And I have to suddenly come up with backstory and personality and all these things. Is that something that happens to you, that it's this is just a person selling lemonade? I haven't thought of anything beyond that.
That happens to me a lot when I'm playing Star Wars, actually.
Yes.
Because they think that every character is if you introduce this character, that means he's connected to the story. No, dude, he's really just working the cantina. There's nothing else to this guy. No. Let's dig deeper with the. Come on. The worst question you could ask me about an NPC that I haven't really prepped for is, so what's his name?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, come on. Bob. His name is Bob. Space Bob.
That's right. Yeah, I like to use the Roll20. If you create a character sheet, it just gives it a random name. So I will sometimes create a random character to be his name is, whatever this sheet comes up with.
Maybe this is forbidden, but I've totally asked my players to help me come up with names.
Oh, that's great. And that's a great way to turn things around on the players. I learned that trick after playing with Rudy Basso one too many times. He likes to know what's happening, and then you just turn around and say you tell me what's happening in this shop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's part of tapping into those 5 extra creative people that are sitting at the table.
Mm-hmm.
They're as creative as you are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great because there's this camaraderie that's built, and it's not you're on the other side. That screen can be a really tall wall, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it kind of minimizes that a bit when I'm I don't know, I didn't prepare this. Can you guys help me with a name? And then it's all funny and hilarious, and then those characters end up being amazing.
Yeah, because it does when I'm asked for a name and I say something that comes out like a fool, that just makes it sound terrible. I'm oh man, this is just bad. But when somebody intentionally makes a joke, it's now we're all having a good time. This is great. Hey everybody, just wanted to take a quick break to let you know about this week's sponsor for Tabletop Babble, Audible.com. Thank you so much for sponsoring this podcast. Audible.com is offering you a free audiobook and 30-day trial of their audio service. If you go to audibletrial.com/DSPN, you can pick up your free book. You might want to try Cosmos by Carl Sagan, narrated by LeVar Burton, Seth MacFarlane, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and many others. So definitely check that out, or one of the many, many other titles over at audibletrial.com/DSPN. Well, so there's something I wanted to do tonight was we have Enrique Bertran, the newbie DM with us. And we have some newbie DMs here. So Brittany and Andrew, if you have questions, I was thinking that we could get some advice from Enrique while he is here. No pressure, Enrique, but I'm sure it will be
none at all.
The perfect answer. And you can always, Enrique, feel free to use your own improv skills and turn it back on them if you want to. So I don't know if either of you have questions either very specific about your campaigns if you want to ask him. Kaner, I don't know how you're going to get around that with me in the room. Or sort of just some general advice stuff, or even just some shop talk, like how do I do this? How do you do this?
Are you both running 5e?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
D&D is the only game you play right now?
Currently, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was running a 5e game on Roll20. And I was running a Star Wars D6 game on Roll20.
Oh.
D6 is the old 80s, 90s Star Wars game.
West End Games.
The West End Games, yeah. Probably my favorite role-playing game, even probably more than D&D. And I was running a face-to-face 5e game, but that one fell apart. I'll do my best.
I definitely would like to hear your take on, I've had a couple moments where I'm just way too busy at work and in the rest of my life to have adequate time to prepare for a game. And I've relied on a couple things, like I have a couple tricks up my sleeve, but they end up just it becomes very obvious that I'm like, I didn't prepare anything. Here's a dungeon that I printed off of the internet. So do you have any tricks up your sleeve that you could throw out there for oh my God, I'm not going to cancel the game, but holy moly, I have nothing that pertains to my story.
So yes, and I think we're on the same wavelength here. I'm pretty upfront when I say, listen, everybody, I haven't had time to prep. We can play tonight. Just know that you're going to go on a side quest.
Yeah.
If you guys are cool with that, we will have a fun night of gaming. If you guys would rather not, we'll postpone. So I keep a lot of books here, and you can't see it on the camera here, but I keep a lot of books and stuff on my desk, little drawers on my desk, a lot of D&D stuff. And I'll pull out something, go through it, and use bits and pieces of that to put together a 3 or 4 room dungeon or encounter area that I think will get me through the night. So right now what I have on my desk here is this book called The Campaign Guide to Undermountain. This is a 2nd edition D&D thing filled with rooms upon rooms upon rooms of dungeon areas. And you could pick 3 or 4 of these rooms, and you might have yourself a couple of hours of gaming. So I'll look through that. I'll look through other stuff that I have, and I'll just create a quick little dungeon to go through and get the night going through that. What I don't want to do is I don't want to ruin the main campaign with stuff that I'm going to regret later. That's going to back me into a corner later.
Yeah.
Because I'm not doing anybody any good with that. I'm not doing the campaign any good. I'm not doing myself any good or the players any good. So either I do the side quest thing and we play around with that, or I'll say, listen, I'm not ready to run. And usually the good thing about gaming with people, our age is that they'll understand if you say you're too busy.
Yeah.
They've been there. So
yeah.
The other thing that I like to do, and this is something that I just started doing because I'm super busy, and so I'm more often than not being like, what can I get on the internet? I'll try to read stuff when I'm doing something else, working out or whatever. If I'm on the bike or something, I'll read an adventure then, so that I already know it and that I already have it, and then while I'm reading it, I'll think okay, so if we play this, how will I, like, who is it a good side quest for? And then that sort of ties it into the story a little more. Like, okay, so at the end of this dungeon, there will be an artifact that, jogs blah, blah, blah's memory, and they remember who their mom is, right? And that starts, ties into another piece of the story, so it feels a little bit more tied in. So if as you're going through that stuff, you make that mental note, it's sort of like prep for those oh crap moments later. You know
what's a great source of material? You got to take some time using it, but it's a great the old dungeon magazines. You take those old, and I'm talking about the old ones, not the 3rd edition era, but I'm talking about you go back older than that. When Chris Perkins used to write for Dungeon Magazine, and you go through some of those modules, and they're very short, they're quick, and you could convert those to 5e rather easily. Sometimes it's just plug and play certain monsters or whatever. And on one of those nights where you got nothing planned, you keep a list of some of the stuff you've converted from Dungeon Magazine, and you just pick it up off the shelf and run your game using that. And you don't even have to sweat it, because they're just like dropping plug and play side quests and stuff that you could run pretty easily. I ran my 5e players, the Roll20 group, through plenty of dungeon adventures over the years. And they're cool adventures. They're fun.
That's one of my favorite books, is a book called Prepared.
It's a Cobalt Press.
Yeah. A guy named John Sawatsky wrote it, a friend of the show. And he's a great designer, and it's all things. Some of them are little dungeon crawls. Some of them are, ambushes on the road, but they're all things that, made for those moments of I have nothing prepared, right? But they all have ways to further the story, ways to continue the story. So they're kind of good jumping off points, so like Brittany, especially for somebody who does a lot of improvisational stuff and collaborative storytelling like you, I think it's great, because it's like, okay, well, I know what we're going to do for the first hour and a half, and then this will I can trust that this will springboard into something interesting. That's kind of a good thing to do too.
The art of being vague.
Right.
I think that's something I can write down. I just wanted to touch on module versus like homebrew stuff. I actually just started trying my hand at the module. Like I put them into Barovia. So we're doing a bit of Curse of Strahd, and like combining those, like taking a little bit from the module and like changing it to fit my own story. I actually find playing with the modules much more difficult than preparing my own stuff.
Yeah, because a lot of the times the modules don't account for player free will.
Mm-hmm.
And it could go off the rails real quick. Mm-hmm. And then what? Especially if you don't have a lot of experience with that. Like, oh, well, you know what? We're not going to go here. We're not going to go here. We're not going to go here. Let's go here. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, crap. That isn't an option here. What do I do?
Yeah.
I mean, that's happened to me. Like, the good thing about Barovia, though, is that they're locked in there, right? There's this fog that doesn't let them leave. So eventually they're going to have to get to where you're trying to get them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just going to happen.
Yeah.
Barovia specifically, they're kind of screwed. They might think they're being clever and heading off in this direction, but eventually Barovia is going to take them right back here where you need them. So Barovia is a little newbie friendly in that regard. That eventually, if you really find yourself in a tight spot, there is nothing wrong with the player suddenly feeling a whole bunch of fog coming their way and sort of squeezing them into a route you got to take them. That happens because that's the will of Strahd taking them wherever they need to go.
Yeah.
So there's no shame in that either.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it very much.
Yeah, it's a fun module.
I would just echo what Enrique said, which is, the module obviously doesn't account for everything, and Curse of Strahd is nice because it is the mist can take them anywhere, and they have sort of this finite world to explore, which is really fun. But also, don't be afraid to change things to suit your needs too. I think they rely on that. Like Wizards assumes that that's what's going to happen now. And I've heard Chris Perkins and other people say like, I wrote the adventure and I don't run it this way. Obviously you don't feel like you're a slave to the text or anything, but I would also say, like if I'm in a dungeon, right? Like a huge dungeon like Castle Ravenloft or the Amber Temple, and it's like, man, we got rooms and nothing but gargoyles here. Great. It's like, you know what? One gargoyle room's probably enough, and I'm going to truncate the castle. The castle's now 40 rooms instead of 80, or 10 rooms instead of 80, or whatever it is. So that's the other thing I would, without shame, change stuff and know that, again, as a player, you're really good at your improv and telling stories on the fly. Trust that if they miss a room and it's like, oh crap, this, the holy sword of vampire slaying was in there and they need that to beat Strahd, you'll be able to put it in another room, or maybe Strahd already has it. Ooh, right, or something like that. So.
There's also, if your players are in point A and you need them to get to point B, and instead they choose to go to point C, there's nothing wrong with taking whatever was in point B and moving it over to point C, which is kind of what you're talking about. Like, they'll never know the difference.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And yes, you're railroading them, okay, but they'll never know.
Yeah.
As far as they're concerned, they chose to go here, and well, okay, you chose to put this here. Nobody will be the wiser if you do it properly, right? now, if they do end up in point B and you move it back to point B, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
That's when you move point A but into point B. You just keep
right.
around.
I mean, if they see the same room twice, then you suck.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
And the great thing is, Enrique, you said this, right? Having forgiving friends is huge.
There's a bit of buy-in. There's a bit of buy-in too. Like, guys, come on.
Yeah, a horror game is only scary if everybody agrees to get scared.
But again, I speak from the point of view of someone who only plays with his friends. I don't have any experience at all running public games. So I don't know how a public table would react to some of these things. I've never done any organized gaming, except at the few Gen Con games that I've been to that I don't DM at Gen Con. I just play. I know you have a lot of experience, James, with organized play.
I do, yeah. I played and ran a lot. I ran like 3 organized play games a week in Atlanta. And the nice thing about that is I think people are more, because generally your players don't necessarily know each other either. So everybody is a little bit more willing to like take the hook and go with it because they know that that's sort of the path of least resistance for everybody around the table. So yeah, that's, I would say, an organized play, be kind to the GM who's there because it might be their first time ever running and you want them to keep doing it to grow the hobby. So, Andrew, do you have questions for Enrique?
Yeah, something I've been thinking about, and anyone can feel free to chime in on this, is so obviously playing with different people bring different things to the game. And so I have a few players who, when it comes to their backstory and everything, they've given me a lot, and others have given me just a little bit, which is totally fine. Like, that's their style. But kind of finding a good balance of, obviously you're telling the main story, but then sprinkling in the little things that relate back to their backstory. For some of these players, I could probably drop something into almost every session related to their backstory. And then others, the little things I have would be big things, but, it would be more spread out. My concern is, kind of, I don't want to dominate the story with one character's kind of side thing. But at the same time, everyone's put time into these characters. And so I want to make sure that their characters are getting stuff out of it beyond just the main story, if that makes sense. So any guidance on finding that balance of making sure the characters are getting what they need or want?
Well, that's a great question. I remember my first 4E campaign. I made a huge mistake. I picked the player who I thought would stick around the longest in the game. All right, so like this dude who's been playing with me for so long, he's really into D&D. I know he's going to stick around. And I sort of I don't want to say I built a campaign around his character, but I incorporated a lot of the backstory of where I wanted the adventure to go. I made it relevant to him and his backstory. And he was kind of an important figure in this eventual story. And then he died. And I realized what a stupid move that was on my part to take a character and make him that important. Because characters at the end of the day are going to die sometimes. And it would have been wrong of me to bring him back to life in a way that didn't seem organic, only because I had decided to make him an important part of the backstory of the greater storyline. So, to answer your question, that's where I think I would tap into the players a little bit and ask them questions, and sort of that's when I would involve them in the world building a little bit. And I don't think this is an answer I would have given you 9 years ago. It took me a lot to get to the point where I'm willing to let go of a lot of the creativity and let other people handle it. It takes some growing as a DM to get to that point, because a lot of DMs feel that they own the story and they own the world and it's theirs and everybody else is a player in it. And this is my stage and you're just merely a player in my stage. And that's not true. So I would ask you, why wouldn't you let a player say, wait a minute, we're where? We're in the Temple of Vahum? My family dealt with Vahum. Because X and Y and this and that, and let them take it from there. And you react to that instead of them reacting to you. But it does take it takes a lot of letting go on your end. Because it really does become a collaborative thing where you're letting them hold the reins of the storyline for a while. And then, you adapt it. Whatever you guys come up with, you take it and run with it. But you got to trust your players that they're going to come up with something cool and worthy of use. And you got to trust that, they know their characters best and let them take a role in creating for their character. It shouldn't just be on you.
As like reinforcement to that, we were the gal that I play with, Nassim, in Venture Maidens, Sage and I both like wrote a very long and in-depth backstory for our character. And Nassim didn't, like hardly at all. Just kind of gave some vague things. And it's important to acknowledge that the people who maybe don't write that backstory kind of want to grow with their character, and they'll be very open and receptive to something that you might present to them. And you'll have this great interaction where they jump on that, and the seed is planted and it blooms into something really awesome for them and for you as a DM. That seems to be what's happening currently in our game with Nassim's character. So it's really cool to see that happening like in real time in response to what you're experiencing or have experienced.
Yeah, I mean, some people write 30 pages of backstory, Andrew Kane, and some write a paragraph. So when Andrew was my player, I definitely got 30-page backstories.
Because I knew you'd read it, James. I adapt to my DM.
It's great. Do you guys have other questions, Brittany or Andrew?
Yeah, would it be cruel for me to kill James with one of his own creations?
I think it would be not cruel. I think it would be actually necessary. That's when you take your next step.
Just know my soul is prepared to die, so I'm ready for it. Well, this has been like super, super fun. Andrew and Brittany and Enrique, I'd love to have you all on again. Maybe we could do like a gut check a year or 6 months or something from now to see how it's gone, because this has been super fun. And I also want to hear more about the games everybody is running. Enrique, I'm sure you run a killer Star Wars game. Are you running a Star Wars game right now?
I am. It's a fun game. I'm enjoying it.
It's great.
Cool. Where it takes place right before takes place between episodes 3 and episodes 4.
Oh, nice. The Rogue One era, if you will.
The Rogue One era. Yeah, but it doesn't. That Rogue One
take place 5 minutes before episode 4.
No, Rogue One was everybody's D6 campaign back in the day, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is true.
Now I had to come up with something else because it wouldn't work.
Well, I think that is going to do it for this episode of Tabletop Babble. Enrique Bertran, where can people find you?
People can find me at noobiedm.com and on Twitter as noobiedm.
Excellent. And engage with him there, because it is awesome. And he'll come on your podcast one day.
I love talking to people on Twitter. I'm always on Twitter. I leave my little window open at work, and I'm always chatting.
That's excellent.
Hit me up.
And Brittany, where can people find you?
I am trying to get better at using Twitter because it is awesome. My Twitter account is Visual Warlock. That's visual with a Z. And it also happens to be my Instagram name. So both of those places.
Excellent. And of course, listen to the Venture Maidens podcast.
Yes, thank you.
yeah, an amazing podcast right here on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. So it's going to be, you're hearing it here first. It's going to be bigger than the Adventure Zone. Boom.
That is our goal, indeed.
I'm saying it. Critical Role, Critical Who. That's what I have to say.
Nice.
Just kidding. I love you, Matt Mercer. I'm sure you're listening. And Andrew Kane, where can people find you?
You can also find me on Twitter, which I too am trying to be better about, at Kaner Gamer. So that's with a K, Kaner Gamer. And I'd like to second that endorsement of the Venture Maidens. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, that is true. When we started, or when we signed, I guess, the Venture Maidens on, Andrew Kane was probably the first new fan. Oh
my God, I'm like kind of blushing right now. You guys have to stop. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for coming on Tabletop Babble today, and I will talk to all of you soon. Thank you so much. It's great.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Great interview. Love having awesome guests on. That was excellent. Can't wait to have them all back. And now it's time for me to read a 5-star review from iTunes. That's right. If you leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, I will read it verbatim. You can make me say anything you want. So, might be worth it to you to go make an iTunes account, even if you don't listen to this podcast on iTunes. Today's review comes from Druten H. Thank you very much, Druten H., a man that I went to high school with, who has an amazing podcast called One Quest that everybody should check out. And his review is entitled, This Time It's Personal. From James Introcaso's icy eyes and warmer lips comes more amazing tabletop RPG talk. I love his talks with different creators and DMs who share their insights into creating and running different RPGs. James, Rudy, and the gang at the Don't Split the Podcast Network have put together a great collection of podcasts. Smile and wave while I reload another fun and informative podcast. Well, Drew, thank you for that trip down memory lane. If people want to understand what the secret hidden messages were in that review, go to thebreakofday.itgo.com. Okay, before we go, I just want to take a quick moment to shout out some of the great podcasts on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. If you're not listening to Game O'Clock, you're not living. DM's Deep Dive is great. Dames and Dragons are awesome. And I want to give a special shout out to Venture Maidens. Brittany Quintero, who was on this podcast, is one of the Venture Maidens. You should definitely check it out. It is a hilarious, fun, amazing, great story in an actual play D&D 5e podcast. Definitely get on it and check that out. All right, people, you can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso, and you can also find out what I'm doing on my blog over at worldbuilderblog.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network, thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. You can check out everything we do at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Remember that RPGs are like sex. As long as everybody's having fun, you're doing it right.